Hey everyone, and welcome back to Chat Like a Native. Today we're going to do a deep dive into something that on the surface might seem pretty simple. But I think once we really get into it, you'll see it's actually pretty nuanced. It's all about expressing your likes and dislikes in English.
Right.
As English learners, we're taught, I like this and I don't like this.
Exactly.
And you can get by with those for sure.
Absolutely.
But we want to help you sound more natural and more fluent when you're speaking. So we're going to kind of go beyond that basic like and don't like.
For sure. And I think it's something that a lot of English learners feel like they struggle with, right? Because it can feel a little bit robotic sometimes when you're just using the same phrase over and over again.
Totally.
So we're going to give you some tools and tips to kind of spice up your language a little bit and make it sound more natural.
Yeah, I think we've all had that experience where like, okay, I'm having a conversation with someone in English, but I just feel like I sound like a textbook.
Totally. Yeah.
And how do we break out of that?
And it's such an important topic, too, because I think expressing your likes and dislikes is one of the main ways that we connect with other people.
Oh, for sure.
Especially in casual settings, right? When you're getting to know someone, you're talking about your hobbies, you're talking about the things you enjoy doing, the things that you don't like. It's a way to kind of find common ground.
Right. It's how you build that connection.
Exactly.
Yeah, like I said, we're taught very basic ways of doing that.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to kind of get into the nitty-gritty and figure out how to do it more like a native speaker.
Totally. So we're going to talk about everything from the difference between formal and informal expressions.
Okay.
So for example, using something like I'm fond of versus I'm really into.
Yeah.
How those subtle changes can really impact the way that you come across.
I like it.
And also we'll talk about the importance of things like tone of voice, facial expressions, body language, all those nonverbal cues that can really amplify or soften what you're saying.
That's a really good point, because I think as language learners, we get so focused on the words that we forget.
Everything else
matters.
It matters too. Absolutely.
So it's like you could say, I like this, but if you're,
Yeah. If you're like monotone and you have no expression on your face,
exactly,
it's not going to come across very genuine.
Yeah. So I'm excited to get into all of that. But first, why don't we start with, I think this is something that all English learners experience.
Right.
Kind of that feeling of being stuck in textbook mode.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right. Like you're always trying to remember the rules and you're not really letting yourself just
have fun with it.
Yeah.
Right.
So how can we start to break out of that and sound more natural?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is just becoming aware of the difference between those formal and informal expressions.
Okay.
Because like I said before, you wouldn't use the same language with your boss that you would with your friends.
Right. Of course.
So for example, instead of saying, I am fond of classical music, which sounds very
formal,
stiff and formal.
Yeah.
You could try something like, I'm really digging classical music lately.
Ooh, I like that.
Which just has like a more relaxed.
It just rolls right off the tongue.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds more like something you would hear native speakers say.
Exactly. And it can also help you feel more confident. Because when you're using language that feels natural to you, you're less likely to be kind of overthinking every word and worrying about making mistakes.
Totally. Because you're not trying to force yourself into this box of, sounding like a textbook.
Exactly.
So yeah, I like that tip a lot.
Cool.
So you mentioned earlier the importance of casual expressions.
Yes.
And how that can really help us sound more like a native speaker. Can you give us some concrete examples of how we can put that into practice?
Totally. So let's imagine a situation like you're at a restaurant with some friends.
Okay.
And you're trying to decide what to order.
And someone asks you, what kind of pizza do you like?
Oh, this is a real life scenario for me. It happens all the time.
And you could just say, oh, I like pizza.
Right.
But that doesn't really give them much to work with.
It's so bland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So instead you could say something like, oh, I'm a sucker for a good wood-fired pizza.
Oh, that's good.
It just kind of paints a picture.
It's so much more descriptive.
Yeah. It gives them more information about your preferences.
And it also kind of like shows your personality a little bit.
Exactly.
Like you're not just stating a fact, you're sharing a little bit.
About yourself.
Yeah, about who you are.
Totally.
And what you like.
Mm-hmm.
What about if you're talking about something that you don't like?
Yeah. So for example, let's say you're not a fan of spicy food.
Okay.
Instead of just saying like, oh, I don't like spicy food, which can sound a little bit negative, you could say something like, spicy food isn't really my thing.
Yeah.
It's still honest.
Right.
But it's a little bit softer. And it keeps the conversation going.
Exactly.
Like you're not just shutting it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that.
Cool.
So we're finding that balance between being honest and keeping things
light and fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that.
So, and remember, it's not just about finding the right phrases, it's also about how you deliver them.
Oh, that's so true.
Right.
Yeah.
So think about your tone of voice, your facial expressions, even your body language, because all of these things can really impact how your message comes across.
Yeah, I think about when I was first learning English, and I was so focused on, like, getting the grammar right.
Right.
Remembering the rules, that my face would be, like, totally blank.
Yeah. I can imagine.
And my voice would be monotone. And it's no wonder that people were, like...
Yeah,
kind of like...
can't really connect.
Not connecting with what I was saying.
Yeah, you were probably coming across as, like
a robot.
A little bit robotic.
Yeah.
And that's such a common experience for language learners because we're so focused on, like you said, getting it right.
Right.
That we forget to actually be ourselves.
Express ourselves.
Yeah. We love that. But the more comfortable you become with the language, the more you can kind of let that guard down and just be yourself.
And have fun.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been really helpful so far.
I'm glad.
But I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear more about...
I know they are.
All these other aspects of,
expressing likes and dislikes.
Yeah. So let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more tips.
Sounds good. So, we were talking about how important it is to be yourself and express yourself authentically.
Right.
But it's not just about, like, our own individual expression, right?
Right.
There's this whole other layer of, like, cultural nuances that we need to be aware of.
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about expressing likes and dislikes.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Because I've definitely had some moments where I was like, oh, I think I came on a little too strong there.
Totally.
Maybe not strong enough.
Yeah.
And I realized that it was probably because of some kind of cultural difference.
It's like there's this hidden code that we need to crack when we're communicating with people from different cultures.
Yeah.
And it's something that, even for native speakers, we're constantly learning and adapting to.
Right.
Because what might be considered polite or appropriate in one culture could be seen as, like, rude or dismissive in another, you know?
Yeah, and it's not always easy to know what those rules are.
Exactly. Especially when you're learning a new language.
Yeah, for sure.
So, for example, in some cultures, it's perfectly acceptable to be very direct about your dislikes.
Okay.
While in others, it's seen as more polite to use softer language or even avoid expressing dislike altogether.
Yeah, I remember when I was traveling in Japan, I noticed that people tended to be very indirect about expressing their preferences.
Especially negative ones.
Especially negative ones.
Yeah.
It was really interesting to observe.
And what's interesting is that it often goes beyond just the words themselves.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right. Yeah. It's the subtle cues.
Yeah.
The tone of voice. The facial expressions.
It's the body language.
All those nonverbal cues play a huge role in conveying meaning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've noticed, even within, English-speaking cultures.
Yes.
Like Americans tend to be very expressive.
Yeah.
With their facial expressions and body language.
Oh, sure.
Whereas, in other cultures, people might be more reserved.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting to kind of see how those differences play out.
Yeah, and it can definitely lead to misunderstandings if you're not aware of those nuances.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think the key is just to be observant.
Okay.
And to ask questions. Yep. If you're not sure how to express something appropriately, don't be afraid to ask a native speaker for guidance.
Right.
Most people are happy to share their cultural insights.
Totally.
And it's a great way to learn and grow.
Yeah. It's like that cultural exchange.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Learning from each other.
I like that.
Appreciating the diversity.
Okay, so we've talked about this kind of cultural code that we need to be aware of. But I think there's another thing that kind of trips up a lot of English learners.
Okay.
Including myself sometimes.
Tell me.
It's the overuse of like and don't like.
Oh, yeah.
It's so easy to fall back on those.
They're like the default.
Yeah, and we hear it all the time.
We do.
But we know there are other ways.
Better ways.
More interesting ways to express those ideas. So how do we break free of that habit?
So I think one of the best ways is to just pay attention to how native speakers talk.
Okay, so like listen to podcasts, watch movies.
Yeah, all of that.
Read books. And just notice how people express their preferences in different contexts. You'll start to pick up on patterns and nuances.
So it's like immersing yourself in the language.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And letting it kind of seep into your brain.
I like that.
But it's not just about passively absorbing information.
Right.
You need to actively practice using these expressions too.
Okay. So how do we do that?
Well, you could try keeping a journal.
Okay.
Where you write down new expressions you come across, and then challenge yourself to use them in real conversations.
Someone like making a little list.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you could join a conversation group or find a language partner to practice with.
Oh, those are good ideas.
The more you use these expressions in context, the more natural they will become.
Yeah, because it's one thing to like write it down.
Yeah.
But it's another to actually
use it.
Yeah, use it in a real conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
And you know what? It's okay to make mistakes.
Totally.
That's how we learn. Right.
Embrace the mistakes.
Exactly.
That's how you get better.
Don't be afraid to experiment and try new things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The goal isn't to sound exactly like a native speaker.
Right.
It's to find your own voice.
Yeah. Express yourself authentically.
Exactly.
Love that.
Cool.
So I think, as we wrap up this deep dive into expressing likes and dislikes, I just want to encourage our listeners to kind of think about what we've talked about today. And, we've talked about the power of casual expressions.
Yes.
We talked about how important those nonverbal cues are.
Right.
And how, culture can really influence the way we communicate. So how can you apply this to your own conversations?
Yes.
What are some things you can do
to level up your English?
Yeah.
Awesome.
And, while you're doing that, be a good listener.
Mm-hmm.
Pay attention to how other people
express themselves.
Yeah, express themselves. And ask questions, to be curious.
Yes.
You might be surprised.
You might learn something new.
Exactly.
You might find some common ground.
I love that. That you didn't even know existed.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It really is about understanding each other. And I think that's something that we can all work on.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
matter what language we're speaking.
For sure.
So I think this has been a really insightful deep dive.
Me too.
Into the world of likes and dislikes.
It's more complex than you think.
It is.
Right? The surface.
It seems so simple.
Yeah.
But, we've covered so much today from, those casual expressions to understanding those nonverbal cues to being aware of all those cultural differences.
Absolutely.
And I think, the key takeaway here is that it's really about
being authentic.
Yeah.
And finding your voice.
And having fun with it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Because learning English should be enjoyable.
It should be.
It shouldn't feel like a chore.
Absolutely not.
So, to all of our listeners out there, keep practicing, keep experimenting, and most importantly,
keep chatting.
Keep chatting. That's what it's all about.
Exactly.
This has been fun.
Yeah, I had a good time.
Me too.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thanks for listening.